Okay, we might as well go ahead and get started. It's 8 o'clock. So good evening and welcome to the 2012 Hirshhorn Summer Camp Film Festival. My name is Dave Wilt and I've been a camp counselor for these events since 2004. Back when I was just a young fellow, fell off the turnip truck, as they say, and look at me now. This job really ages you. But I'd like to thank the Hirshhorn for inviting me back this year. It's always a pleasure to come down here for the summer film series. I mean, you know, instead of just staying at home, sitting on the couch, watching television, you can come down here to the Ring Auditorium and sit and watch movies. But at least it gets you out of the house and it's a big screen, and so you can enjoy things. This year, we departed a little bit from the science fiction themes of earlier years with something that we, and by we, I mean Kelly Gordon, who's the mastermind behind the summer camp film series here at Hirshhorn, likes to call Baby Camp. And when Kelly first told me that this year's theme was Baby Camp, of course the first thing that I thought of was but then I thought, well, that couldn't be it. But perhaps she was showing a bunch of movies like this. And then I said, no, she said, we're presenting 3 weeks of films that, although they do have baby in the title, they're actually more adult-oriented. All right, maybe not that adult-oriented. This week it's the 1933 bad girl melodrama Babyface. Next week, the 1950s white trash masterpiece Baby Doll, and the final Baby Camp feature on Thursday night, the 28th of June, is John Waters' Cry Baby, starring some guy named Johnny Depp. I hear he's very good. Anybody know what happens to him? He's still around. He's 20-year-old now. If you've been to previous summer camps, you know that I try to earn my keep by talking a bit about the background and the context of the movies that we're going to see. Some of you may have noticed when you were thinking about coming down here, tonight's film was made in 1933, and you said to yourself, Self, I bet that's going to be one of those old, boring, non-sexy, classic black and white films, and who wants to see that? But little did you know that old movies weren't always as sanitized and grandmother-friendly. Here are some of the rather surprising things you might have seen in big-budget mainstream Hollywood films of the 1930s.
with your caress. Sweet marijuana, marijuana, help me in my distress. Sweet marijuana, please do. You alone can bring my lover back to me, even though I know it's all a fantasy. And then put me to sleep, sweet marijuana, marijuana. You alone can bring my lover back to me, even though I know it's all a fantasy. And then put me to sleep, sweet marijuana, marijuana.
Here's the way. Come on, you're picking out of here. The first thing you know, you'll be out in the audience.
What's that?
Don't you know?
Blood.
Hey, what's the matter up there?
It's blood.
Ah, you're crazy. That's...
So there we see violence, nudity, references to marijuana, etc., etc. And you may say, in astonishment, how could such things exist in movies of the 1930s? Why, producer David O. Selznick had to get a special dispensation just so in Gone with the Wind, Rhett Butler could say, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, instead of, frankly, my dear, I don't care in the slightest. The answer lies in something called the production code. Today, we're all familiar with the Motion Picture Association of America's ratings of G, PG, PG-13, R, and C-17. However, this system wasn't put into place until the late 1960s. Prior to that, there was no rating system. So, why did our parents and grandparents feel safe in going to the movies? Because the film industry self-censored itself. The production code was devised by the film industry in 1930 to forestall any kind of governmental control of motion picture content. A list of do's and don'ts was provided to the studios. And this is something that was put together by a studio employee sort of mocking it in a list of things that aren't supposed to be shown, like the inside of the thigh and lingerie and a dead policeman, and you can't really see too well, but there's a hypodermic needle on the table, etc. So this is sort of codifying all of the things you weren't supposed to do. However, even though this was set up in 1930, the studios really didn't pay much attention to the code at first, and there was no real enforcement mechanism, which led to the sort of films we just saw some clips from, and in fact to the film we're going to see tonight. After all, the United States was in a depression, people didn't have much money, so if they were going to go to the movies, they had better be entertained for their nickel or a dime. And so we get a lot of surprisingly adult themes in movies of the very early 1930s. This upset some people because in the absence of any national rating system, theoretically any movie could be seen by any person of any age. In other words, there was no such thing as an R-rated film that kids could sneak into. There was just no rating. You'll notice shortly on one of the slides you'll see an advertisement for Babyface, which does say, "Parents, please do not bring your children." But this was rather rare. Many cities and states had their own censor boards, and each had their own criteria about what could and couldn't be shown in their particular area. Movies could be banned or they could be forced to be cut in order to receive permission to be exhibited in these different places. And this was confusing and inefficient. What New York might allow, Pennsylvania or Ohio might prohibit. So in 1934, some interest groups got together and convinced the motion picture industry to finally start strictly enforcing their production code. Even before then, some films such as tonight's film Babyface were affected both by the code authority and by local censors, but a lot of stuff slipped through, as we saw in this particular clips. Although local censor boards still had their own ideas about what was proper and what was not, the production code at least helped homogenize Hollywood movies and forestalled any attempt at a national film censor board. And that was, at the end, at least until the 1960s, of movies with curse words, men and women sleeping in the same bed, visible navels on women, depictions of drug use, movies in which criminals were not punished, and so on. Now, the production code applied only to films from companies belonging to the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors Association, which is why you still can see movies made on the fringe, like Reefer Madness, Cocaine Fiends, Sex Madness, and so on, being made in the 1930s and beyond, but these were far out of the mainstream and they weren't shown widely. Most of the films that we're familiar with today were made under the production code by the major studios. Under the code, films often had to undergo revisions before they could be released. The code office read scripts and made suggestions, and furthermore, movies made before 1934 often had to be re-edited before they could be re-released after 1934. So if you made a film in 1933, like we saw The Gladiator there, that was a film called Sign of the Cross. If you wanted to show it in 1936, it had to be sent before the production code board, and they said, oh, you can't do this, and it was heavily edited before it could be shown again. The result of all this is that movies were much tamer after 1934, and the so-called pre-code movies were rarely available in their original form after 1934. So even some real film buffs were often unaware of exactly how risque some early movies were. Fortunately, as in the case of tonight's film Babyface, in recent years a number of movies that were cut due to the code have been restored to their full length for DVD release. The uncut version of Babyface, for example, was discovered in the collection of the Library of Congress in 2005, and for that we're grateful. Other movies of the era, sadly, are apparently lost forever in their original versions. In the case of the one in the upper right-hand corner, Convention City, that is apparently completely lost. It was heavily cut, and then to avoid having people keep asking, can we see Convention City? We want to see Convention City. Apparently, the studio just completely destroyed it, burned it up, burned it, negatives, everything, and then they could say, oh, sorry, we don't have it anymore.